In all of Canada's history until 2020, only 4 TV dramas made by and about Black Canadians had made it to air on a major broadcaster. Canada's screen output has been predominantly white, male, and heterosexual, even though Black people have been part of Canada's population since before Confederation. The system is broken, or more accurately, it was designed to exclude Black creators and Black-focused content from the Canadian screen canon. So in 2021, the Black Screen Office set out to identify the central issues that create barriers for Black screen industry workers and Black audiences. While Black people are uniquely marginalized by Canada's screen industry, the BSO recognized that there are common experiences across all underrepresented groups. Examining and addressing inclusion and authentic representation holistically would be critical for the industry to become truly equitable. The BSO launched 3 research projects: Being Counted, Being Heard, and Being Seen. With the knowledge gained from this research, BSO can work with decision makers on tools and strategies to dismantle the industry's anti-Black practices and improve authentic representation overall. The 3 research projects look at the issues from different angles. Being Counted looks at audiences, specifically Black, Indigenous, and people of color audiences, whose preferences are usually hidden within general population data in traditional audience surveys. This basically makes them invisible to screen content decision makers. Through Being Counted, these decision makers gain insight into who they are missing, as well as these viewers' habits and preferences. Being Heard looks inward at the Canadian screen industry. It offers data on the prevalence of Black workers and their experiences. Black industry workers have not been examined in any meaningful way until now, and Being Heard will help identify ways to support their success. Being Seen looks at Canada's screen industry content. Inspired by Imaginative's protocols and pathways, Being Seen explores the perspectives of screen industry professionals and members of the viewing public who are Black, people of color, 2S LGBTQIA+, and people with disabilities. From across the country, more than 400 individuals from these communities participated in Being Seen focus groups and interviews in both English and French. Participants included members of the screen industries as well as the general public. For the Children's Media Report, we talked to children's media creators from the 4 communities, and also parents and children and youth ranging in age from 6 to 17. Knowing that individuals have multiple dimensions, BSO took an intersectional approach to this research, which allowed participants to talk about any aspects of their identity. Letting participants choose allowed them to bring their full selves to these discussions. BSO also divided communities into subcategories whenever possible, such as a blind or deaf focus group within the people with disabilities category. This allowed for deeper exploration of specific communities. Within these Being Seen safe spaces, participants spoke with passion, strength, vulnerability, and at times, tears. They provided valuable insights into how Canada's screen industries can and must change to better reflect them and their needs. Many common themes emerged across the communities, as well as challenges unique to each community group. The result of this research is the Being Seen Core Report, which captures the universal themes shared across all 4 communities. There are also 5 companion reports, 1 in each community, and a Children's Media Report. Each report offers anecdotal insights on representation, as well as clear directives for industry leaders on how to create and commission more authentic and inclusive content. The data and perspectives that Being Counted, Being Heard, and Being Seen reveal establish an evidence-based foundation for change. This BSO research can and should support industry leaders to create and approve content that authentically represents the full diversity of Canada's communities. We also expect them to prompt more discussion and action on the structural changes that are needed to increase representation on set, on screen, and in industry boardrooms.
Here we are for the fifth and final Shaw Rocket Fund Black Screen Office Being Seen Children's Media Workshop for children's content creators. If you've joined us for all of them, thank you. It's been quite a week of conversations, but it's entirely possible this was the only one you could make. The recordings are going to be out sometime in the next couple of weeks, so you will be able to go back and see anything that you missed. So we're going to get started. I am Kelly Lynn Ashton, the lead researcher on Being Seen. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by honoring the land that we are on, which has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. The Black Screen Office is located on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation. However, as a virtual meeting, we want to also acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations who call this land home and host us today and every day. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or generations past. We would also like to acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as the result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. So to also provide you with a visual description, I am a woman with a tan skin, short gray hair, red glasses, pink t-shirt. There's a blue wall background and stairs behind me. And occasionally you will see my cat going up or down. And I'm now going to introduce my fellow facilitator for this, Sasha Boersma, and you can introduce yourself.
Excellent. Happy Friday, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I'm in an office. There's a glass wall behind me decorated with brightly colored art. I have colleagues here as well, so you might see them popping back and forth in the background. Myself, physically, I'm a larger woman, think like Viking-esque kind of approach without the horns. I have long, straight blonde hair that's kind of going ashy with silver, and you may see tips of purple when I'm playing with my hair as I talk. I wear glasses. I'm wearing really long pendant earrings, and I tend to wave my arms and hands around a lot when I talk. And so who am I as Sasha Boersma? I am a neurodivergent entrepreneur, and sorry, I should slow down. I'm a neurodivergent entrepreneur, and I am co-founder of Sticky Brain Studios, where we make family-friendly games while keeping accessibility considerations on top of mind. About half our team have disabilities, mostly different forms of neurodivergence, but a few physical disabilities too. I also teach in various film, TV, and interactive media programs at Centennial College here in Toronto. And in my 12 years as a professor, I've seen a huge rise in students with disabilities. But then in turn, I've watched many of them struggle to land in the industry due to bias and lack of opportunity. So the discussion of inclusion of people with disabilities is extremely important to me. I will admit, though, I am not the expert on disabilities. The reason is there are so many different disabilities and they all present in their own ways. I can't cover them all today. So consider this a taste of the thinking of authentic storytelling and representation for people with disabilities. Before we get too deep into the presentation, I want to put a survey link in the chat for you. Thank you, Christine, on it already. So thanks to Christine, there's a link to, there is a link in the chat for you. If you could go to that link and write all the words that come to your mind when we talk about people with disabilities or disabilities in general or disabilities in children's media? The survey will show 10 slots, but you can submit many times if you have all the thoughts in your head. And if you can't think of 10 and only think of like 4, that's okay. You can just submit those 4. I'm going to throw back to Kelly Lynn for a bit more housekeeping, and then we'll look at what you come up with.
Well, I think what I first want to do is, because we've done this with each one of the workshops, is talk a bit about context and the statistics. So if we can throw up, I think the first slide, the statistics slide. So what do we mean by people with disabilities? First off, 22% of Canadians live with disabilities. And I found in our research, this was just a statistic that many people were familiar with. They knew the size of their community as an aggregate. And I think that increases the frustration at lack of representation at all in many cases, but definitely lack of authentic representation. The way that this is broken down on this chart is the way that Statistics Canada breaks it down. So those with disabilities, you know, as you can see, pain is the top one, flexibility, mobility, mental health, and so on. And one of the other points that people frequently made to us is that people with disabilities is the only community that we deal with that anybody can join or find themselves a part of at any time in their life. So you might not be born that way. It may be something that develops over time with your health, or because of an accident, you end up joining that community. But that's something that everybody should be aware of because they may find themselves in this community. Now, one of the problems with the stats is that StatsCan doesn't address intersectionality. So we have no information on ethnocultural data. So can't say how many people are, South Asian and with disabilities, or LGBTQ and disabilities. We do know that there's a great deal of representation just based on our research, but some other studies in other jurisdictions where it is a very diverse community. Frustration that that's not portrayed, but this is something to keep in mind. And then back to Sasha.
Thank you. So if you haven't already, there's a poll in the chat with Menti where if you can contribute some of the words that come to mind when you think of people with disabilities. See, a few people have posted, and there's no wrong answers. This just gives me a guide to where you're at as a group before we head into the workshop side. But I will share, you know what, Christine, just in essence of time, if you don't mind sharing the results page just for it, because I'm going to screen share it, but also it's not easy sometimes for it to be seen for those with visual impairment. So give me 1 second while I share it for myself, and then I will share screen in just a second. There we go. Okay, so share my screen. And you can still contribute, by the way. So the first link is still very much valid. And so a few people have contributed, and it's interesting, some of the words. And so the one that had first popped up was invisible. And that was like, so the very first one, just invisible, was big on the screen for me, which I thought was very poignant. And of course, we think of disabilities, we think of athletics and physical, because a lot of the representation of people with disabilities tends to be related to the Olympics, the Paralympics. Of course, people with disabilities are misunderstood, underrepresented, as Kelly Lynn introduced. Many people with disabilities use tools. Neurodivergence, which of course is where I am at, and many people more people are speaking to than before. People with disabilities are judged. which is what we're going to address in the workshop today. This one's interesting, unnecessary attention. And I'm really curious, whoever wrote that, because that could go in a few different ways. That can go into like an unnecessary attention to the disability itself, forgetting the person. Or it could be someone who feels that disability gets too much attention and maybe, doesn't need as much. I'm pretty sure it's the first example though, where it tends to be what the person in the story is about rather than who the person is. And then of course, I love whoever wrote badass. Thank you. And villains. And that's something that, definitely there's a lot of the representation of disability tends to be, in that villain side. You think of in classic Disney stuff like Captain Hook is a one classic example of someone with disabilities, or someone gets, disfigured and becomes a bad person, which is a whole lot of Batman, actually. So there's a lot to that. So thank you for sharing. Just gives me a little bit of context. So I'm switching my screens, just closing that one and moving my other one over so I have it in front of me. There we go. Excellent. So I would like just to take a moment, and I would love for you to, do we have the raise hand function? I think we have it. Yeah. So I'd love for you to either raise your hand using the raise reactions button down below, or contribute in the chat if you feel more comfortable that way. But I would love to know examples that you can think of representation of people with disabilities in children's media. There are a few. Although even I had to rack my brain a little bit. And there are some fantastic recent examples, actually, which is impressive. And if you can't think of any, it's okay if you just want to pop in the chat and say, I honestly can't. And that's just so I know that you're engaged. So again, the question, and I'll pop it in the chat, can you think of any examples of people with disabilities in children's media? Who is all here? See, I actually know some of you. I recognize some names from different workshops I've done and teaching, or names that I can't picture, but I know. But I won't be as cruel as calling you all out.
Renata, I see you there.
So Renata's given a few. So I just want to actually give a shout out to Renata. If you didn't already see her do the session on people of color, they also, a number of the shows at Lopi Productions that she owns with her sister have some fantastic disability representation. I worked with them for a short while on this beautiful show for TV Ontario called My Home, My Life, where they, take a kid and just in 20 minutes, just show the kid being a kid and their bedroom and what they do with their family. And it is some of the best real life representation of people, of kids with disabilities that I've seen on Canadian television. So just since Renata put her camera on and chimed in the chat, I figure she deserves that call out. It's a great little show. It's on TVO YouTube. It's doing fantastic. So please do watch it and add numbers so they keep getting more great representative shows.
Well, we've got a lot of good titles here.
Yes.
On Sesame Street, Daniel Tiger, Finding Nemo.
I like that Raising Dion got in there. Yeah, Finding Nemo. It's funny, when I did my own double checking, I didn't even think of Finding Nemo until I read it. And I was like, yeah, because little Nemo, of course, has one normal sized fin and one little tiny fin. And that's why he has a hard time swimming. And then, of course, Dory has memory loss and brain injury. And it was like, right. Even thought of that. For those who don't know, there's a fantastic new show on Apple TV that if you haven't watched called Best Foot Forward, which is probably the first dramatic show about a kid with a prosthetic leg. And the kid actually does have a prosthetic leg, and it's based on an actual story of Josh Sundquist, who's a comedian in the United States. You know, arcane teen content totally counts in the children's media space. I figure anything Shaw Rocket Fun funds is considered eligible, and they do fund teen. So yeah, arcane is another. A few other examples. See, I have my own little list. Where'd my notes go? Oh no, I've lost. I had a whole bunch of notes to this, but yes, Atypical, Sesame Street, Daniel. I might forget. There's one other really good one that I was like, oh, I gotta mention. But thank you everyone for the contributions, because these are fantastic. Endlings, yes. All righty. So you do have a sense of content for kids, which is fantastic. One thing that does come up, and we haven't talked about here, which I think is wonderful, it did come up in the initial slide about villains. And a lot of times when we see, historically, when we see content for kids that feature people with disabilities, it's usually that they need to be pitied. Thinking of Quasimodo from Hunchback of Notre Dame, or Tiny Tim from, you know, Christmas Carol. It's like they're sad, they're deformed villains, or they're jerks, or they're homeless, and it just misses the richness of people with disabilities. I did a WIFT workshop earlier this summer, and someone talked about how they're working with, it's a story about bipolar depression, and they were trying to figure out like what to do with it. And we talked, and I was like, people with depression have some of the most wicked sense of humor. And they were like, yeah. Oh my, and it suddenly just had this whole workshop change, because they were like, oh, depression was going to be this really sad story. And they realized, no, it's this fantastic story. So sometimes we don't fully appreciate what content can do. So I'm going to share my screen. I want to talk a little bit about language. And I should actually put this in slideshow view so we see it full screen. When we talk about disabilities, there's some really important things that we have to be mindful of as children's content creators. And that is the language that's used when we talk about people with disabilities. It's very common to say, oh, it's a disabled person. The problem is that puts the disability first. That says, oh, this is a disability on a person, versus when we say it's a person with a disability, it shifts the perspective from the focus on the disability to the focus on the person. Two other words that are often used in the English language that we should not be using when we talk about people with disabilities, differently abled. Differently abled was actually a phrase that came up by able-bodied people because they felt uncomfortable dealing with disabilities. It wasn't a phrase that came up from the disability community at all. And so it's yeah, there's differently abled, but you know why we're differently abled? Because we have a disability. So let's deal with the fact we have a disability. The other one not to use is handicapped. It was used a lot in the 1980s in particular. So those of us that might have grew up in the school systems with integrated classrooms, they might have talked about the handicap classes. We've moved away from that language as well in English Canada. However, because we are a bilingual nation, it is important to know, because one weirdness is sometimes English and French are very similar in words, but have slightly different intentions, or language grows differently. So in Quebec, you may see the phrase handicapé. I think I've said that. Killian can correct me if I was off a bit. But it's handicapé is what is used in French language Canada to describe people with disabilities. The language that people with disabilities in Francophone Canada have not redefined the word. And so that is the acceptable phrase in French. Some couple of exceptions though, because we talk about it's just person first, then disability. However, in a handful of communities, disability communities, it does go disability first, and it's capitalized, much like when we talk about Black Canadians, and it's like capital B, and Indigenous Canadians, and we talk about, or Indigenous peoples, I should say, and that capital I, it's recognizing a cultural entity of the person. And you'll see this with the deaf community and the blind community. And again, there's a nuance in the English language which affects what we write in our scripts and in our stories. So a deaf person with a capital D is someone who identifies as being part of the deaf community. They connect through cultural, language instances, etc., that's unique to the deaf community, such as communicating with ASL, or the American Sign Language, in French, communicating with LSQ, which is the Quebec Sign Language. And also there are many variations of sign languages used by the Indigenous and Black communities as well. So in the United States, they actually have BSL as an offshoot of ASL because of segregation in the deaf schools as well historically. Versus a deaf person, or a person who happens to be deaf, which is the lowercase d. This person may be deaf, but they don't necessarily connect to the community. Oh, I'm deaf in one ear. The other one is they might consider themselves more hard of hearing. So they might legally be deaf, and they might say that they're deaf, but they might personally see themselves more as hard of hearing versus being integrated into the deaf community. And so that's a language shift to be aware of. And I probably shouldn't say deaf person in the second example. I'm just doing it to show the capitalization differences, but it's probably more person who is deaf or person who is hard of hearing. And the same with the blind community. So we have a blind person, capital B, same idea. Someone who identifies as being part of the blind community. Again, connection through culture. There's a whole different sensory experience with the world when you're blind. Use of Braille for contact, use of descriptions for things. And again, it just shifts the cultural connection. And so again, capital B. However, again, you can have someone who says, oh, I'm blind. Well, they may not identify as part of the blind community because maybe they still have some sight and they consider themselves visually impaired, or they don't consider themselves like blind in the same capacity. So again, that's something to be mindful of. Is this someone who is a blind person as connected into the blind community? Is this someone who is a deaf person who's connected to the deaf community, or do they happen to be deaf or happen to be blind? The other community where there's an exception is the autistic community. And so again, with autism, the autistic community, it's a bit shaky. Sometimes people like to be called an autistic person. And again, they feel that their autism is who they are. So they're like, I am an autistic person, which is how I identify. However, there are many that don't. Many that are like, I'm a person who happens to have autism. So they would use person with autism. Also, neurodivergent person is starting to come about. So again, that's they may not want to say they're autistic, especially as new research is showing that autism is connected to like 4 other different conditions. So they might just call it neurodivergent person. And then of course, autism we say, and we say ASD for the autism spectrum disorder. 3 phrases we do not use in regards to autism. We do not use Asperger's, we do not use Asperger's syndrome, and we are starting to move away from the phrase ASPI, which used to be the shorthand for Asperger's. 2 reasons. The medical reason is that the DSM-5, which is the guidebook for mental health conditions, phased out Asperger's about 5 or 6 years ago and merged it into autism outright. The reason is they found brain scans were no different between the two. So they realized Asperger's is just autism. So we're just going to call it autism. The other thing that's come to light in the last 5 years is Hans Asperger was a Nazi who was only doing his research because they found that some autistic people had great memories. And so how could we exploit that for the purposes under Hitler and all that good stuff. So most people with autism tend to not. And interestingly, those who do insist that they have Asperger's tend to, identify in other ways that are not really socially acceptable. I see a few things coming up. Oh, fantastic for the extra links in the chat. Thank you, Christine. All right, and I think it's back to Kelly Lynn.
Okay. So what we wanted to do, so that's a really great overview. And as we've talked about in some of the other workshops, vocabulary is evolving. As Sasha pointed out, Asperger's used to be an okay phrase. Then we found out he was a Nazi, and now it's not an okay phrase. If you're, when in doubt, ask. And when people, as she suggested, some people are comfortable with deaf, some people aren't capitalizing it, just ask. When it's coming from a good place of questioning and wanting to be respectful, then it's with all identities. People will welcome the questions. And as Renata says, we've learned to ask people how they prefer to be identified. And we actually, in one of the focus groups, we had somebody say, well, they actually prefer differently abled. And then we had a conversation with the other members of the focus group who explained why they weren't comfortable with that phrase. And it was an opportunity for learning on both sides, so that they can all see how they feel and why they feel about the different terms. But speaking of consultation, why don't we go to the slide with quotes, and we'll hear directly from some of the kids. A lot of them who participated, who had disabilities, it was just their frustration that they don't see themselves. And when they do, the few times that they do, they look up who the actor is, and the actor doesn't have a disability. And I heard this over and over again. These kids will look it up. They'll look up who the actor is who's in a wheelchair. And they get super frustrated that all these opportunities are going to people who aren't actors, who are not with the disability.
Can I interrupt on that point? Because there's a neat little anecdote relating to that. For this show on Apple TV called Best Foot Forward, what was really important to the show's creator, because he was an amputee himself, was the child in the show was like grade 6, kind of grade 12 years old, had to also be an amputee. Had to. There was no condition. And of course, that's really hard to find. So he went on his Instagram, he has a huge Instagram following. He went on his Instagram and said, I am making a show and we need kids who are missing a leg. And they went right to go searching. So they found a kid who just had local theater experience, because that authenticity was so important to the story. So thanks.
We've heard anecdotes of people doing Canada-wide casting, trying to find people who are kids who are that have that specific identity. And it is hard, but then you open up opportunities. So there was one kids show where they did a Canada-wide casting to get a deaf child, and the child had been a model. Now the child is a performer. And that's how you grow the talent pool. Just takes in a little extra work. So the next quote is about the frustration that when they see kids in wheelchairs, they're always these super high performing athletes. They're playing basketball, and they're not everybody who is in a wheelchair is an athlete. And yes, we've got the Paralympics, but this is even in regular stories that they're seeing. And then another child was that they don't see their specific disability, and their disability is not something that is always obvious. So they get frustrated because then they don't, people ask them too many questions. And so this is, again, there's a wide range of disability. Like every disability has a wide range in how it presents. And we're not saying you have to throw them all in, but throw in more of them so that you've got more kids who have a chance to see themselves.
Any questions so far? I get the feeling that, oh, more familiar faces have joined the recording. Hello, everyone. Any questions or anything you want to add or contribute to some of the things that Kimmy-Lynn and I have shared so far? If you wanted to pop in chat, or feel free to use your voice as well. Just want to make sure that there's space as we go in case anyone wants to jump in. Everyone's just at the edge of their seats. And I enjoy the ASL interpretation of that. One thing I enjoy, I've been working with the Canadian Cultural Society for the Deaf, and we're working with and it's so interesting watching ASL be communicated to me. It's a fascinating other language, especially because English is so boring. It's neat to see something so expressive. One other thought that we haven't talked about, but I feel like that's also important, is how sometimes we use ableist language and don't realize it. And I hear it a lot as I watch scripted children's content, and it just makes me go every time. And I know the writers and showrunners don't mean to be a problem, because we just don't talk about use of language. And so the other thing that kind of comes up as a problem is the way that we use ableist adjectives and adverbs in our content. And we've all seen a show that will talk about, oh, I know, I'm so OCD, where someone is just, double checking if they lock the door, and then it becomes a joke that they have OCD, or just obsessive control disorder. And that it just belittles people who actually have OCD. It just gets thrown off as a bit of a joke. It's like, can we not say something else? Like, oh, I know, I just like to be extra careful or extra sure, and save the use of the phrase OCD for people who actually are. Also, a history of words. The word dumb, D-U-M-B, was historically an insult to deaf people, which then became used as a general word to insult people with learning disabilities. So now we just go, oh, that's so dumb. But for many people with disabilities, that's a cringe. Another word that we often use is crazy. The word crazy was used to alienate people with mental illness. So some people cringe on the word crazy. The words idiot and moron were used to shame people with Down syndrome. And most recently, if you haven't been following the controversy of the use of the word spaz, S-P-A-Z, it's historically an insult to those with cerebral palsy. And actually both Lizzo and Beyonce both had to, they didn't have to, but they both listened to the Black disabled communities in particular, who spoke up and said, hey, we're really upset. We love you, Lizzo. We love you, Beyonce. Why are you using the word spaz in your song? It hurts us. And both Lizzo and Beyonce went, oh, right. There was a different context for the use of the word spaz in a lot of the Black communities. And Lizzo and Beyonce, two of the biggest performers, musicians in the world, re-recorded their songs and reissued their albums. Like, that's both.
Yeah. Kai, did you have a question?
It wasn't exactly a question, but it was going in that direction. And just also, I was just thinking of how on the opposite side of things, you sometimes will have a character and they may or may not have a diagnosis of a specific diagnosis, but instead of it being something like, well, maybe we do need to go and check if they need to have a diagnosis, because maybe this might not be just a personality quirk, this might be something a little bit bigger. It turns into, like, a punchline. So, and then they have all these things like, oh, that's, and then they become, yeah, the buffoon, or the person who's in their own world, or something like that, they're the forgetful one, but maybe they have ADHD or something like instead of it, and it's so consistent, it's so prevalent, it's such a huge part of the person's personality, but instead of being treated like maybe it is something else, it then, as I said, becomes a punchline.
Completely.
To the story.
Completely. That's a great segue to what I'm about to head into too. So I love when that happens. I love when conversation goes and I'm like, yes, it's a perfect segue to where we're going. I want to also add to that too, that there's also positive, that, you know, the role of the positive representation. And I bring this up because it's so easy for us. And as a person with disability, it is so easy for me to point out what everyone's doing wrong. I think we also need to celebrate where things are going right, because that's our examples to do. And that's why I like the Lizzo Beyonce thing, because it's like they stopped and listened and fixed it. And everyone loves them even more for it. We're going to make mistakes. We just have to listen and grow. And you see some great disability representation in a very small way in the film Turning Red. Did anyone else notice the diabetics lose their mind on social media because two of the characters had glucose monitors on their arms? And one of them even had it connected to a glucose machine, actually, someone's pointed it, because the diabetes community just went wild. Because and it's, you know, we don't think of diabetes as a disability per se anymore because we have a handle on it medically, but it still is a form of a disability for many young people. Yeah, Shay got it. It's a pump and a CGM being visible, you know, and that's all it was. It's just, you know, oh yeah, Babysitters Club. I forgot they have that too. Yes. It's such an important thing for people to see. And then they go, oh my gosh, I see myself. And so it's turning some of these, you know, negatives, and how do we flip them over? And so that way we get these, you know, really great celebration moments. And so this, I want to do workshop, but this, I would like you all to contribute using voice and or chat, please, which would be fantastic. For those of you who may be people with disabilities, I will admit that did I share properly? I did. I will admit that the following descriptions are intentionally incorrect, and they're presented as they kind of typically would be in scripts and stories, and they may be deemed offensive, because what we're going to do as a group is look at how we can fix them and how we can make them, you know, flip it on its head. And so the first one, a 12-year-old child with Tourette's has a physical tic. At every step, they regularly holler, "Stupid!" at nothing and nobody. And of course, when do we usually see this? When we see Tourette's and people with Tourette's doing this on television, is it to, you know, why do we typically lean on this? We're usually using it for a very specific thing. Is it to help the person with Tourette's feel good, or, you know, what's the audience reaction that we think we're achieving with this?
A laugh.
Yeah, it's a laugh. Tourette's is actually a very complex neurological disorder. And it's fascinating too, actually. For those on TikTok, I highly recommend following Otters with Pockets. She's I don't know, late teenager in the United Kingdom, and she shares about being, I think she's ADHD and Tourette's. But it's fascinating, it changes your mind when you actually follow people with Tourette's on social media. And so what can we do differently with this? You know, Tourette's is important. Kids do have Tourette's. Thank you for sharing about Jess Tomshay. That's great. Oh, thank you. Someone a participant has corrected me, which I appreciate, that it's not Tourette, because that's because what happens is we shorten it's Tourette syndrome, and then we shorten it into Tourette's. Same with Asperger's, Asperger syndrome, we call it Asperger's. And so it's right. The condition's Tourette. My apologies. And thank you for the DM correction. So what can we do differently about this? Like, how else can we you know, for whatever reason in the story, we're going to have a character who has Tourette syndrome. What can we do differently here? Any thoughts? Or did I pick a hard one off the top?
Could they have another expression, or use a different phrase, or just another representation of what Tourette's could look like? Or I don't know if we're seeing is it a boy or girl, or I'm not sure, but the child, if we're seeing their full world and what that might look like, what triggers it, so you kind of understand the context of when it's triggered. Might be-
Totally. Yeah. Shay, excellent point. Only a small percentage of folks with Tourette syndrome actually have profane verbal tics. And actually, there's someone I follow on TikTok for fitness, and she shared a video. She's like, by the way, I have Tourette syndrome, and she does not do verbal. It's a physical thing. It's a physical movement she has. Like, it's just like one of these things that she does, like literally. And I'm not doing that to make fun of her. She showed it. And it's like, that's it. So does it even have to be a verbal tic? You know? So it's like, hey, can we show, Tourette syndrome in another way? Can we show, like Kai was saying, show, other representations, show the trigger? Because it's anything. And what one person I've seen talking about Tourette syndrome, where they've mentioned that it's often, a phrase, and it's like the phrases just replace a thought. And so the phrase has some other meaning rather than anything else. Great note from Renata, show them beyond their disability, a backstory of who they are. Tourette is not the sole personality trait. That's a big one. Do we need to have a kid run on screen just to tick away and yell things? Like, what does that add other than comedic relief? Okay, well, that's actually kind of insulting. So is it even funny at that point? Shay has a great point. If you actually cast someone with Tourette syndrome, you can have them. So again, if you're not developing the character just to run on screen and be a comedic effect, but you actually want a child with Tourette in the storyline in a meaningful way, cast a kid with Tourette and adjust the character to the tics of that actor rather than something you make up. And then suddenly this becomes an authentic character who's whole and is more interesting. Thank you, everyone. Let's do the next one. A wheelchair-bound child, aged 8, sits despondent and depressed. I dream of being able to walk like a normal kid. It's not fair that I'm stuck here. There's a lot to work with in this one. What are some of the things we could rethink here to make this character more interesting and more real, more authentic, as we're using in the Being Seen report? I'll start with one, and it's the language thing, the wheelchair bound. People who use wheelchairs very much dislike the phrase wheelchair bound. The reason being is it puts the wheelchair first, and it presents the person as being stuck to the wheelchair versus someone who, I am a person who uses a wheelchair. And Shay, that is exactly correct. Thinking about the person who uses the wheelchair, if you're born in a condition where you've just always used a wheelchair, you're not necessarily likely to know any other life, to pine for another life. And that many kids, oh, and thank you for sharing that Shay is a manual wheelchair user. I appreciate that. So yes, I'm sure you will have lots to dissect in this example. And so, yes, it's, they're not bound. People might have grown into a condition with using a wheelchair, and some of those people are just happy to be able to still enjoy life. The whole I'm sad and destroyed that I'm in a wheelchair often comes from those who may have, not needed a wheelchair, had many decades of life, gotten, had something happen to them and suddenly found themselves in a wheelchair, and it was part of the mourning of the life they used to have. So we need to not, as people, if you're a person who does not use a wheelchair, and I'm not, let's not assume that because you might feel sad to suddenly find yourself in a wheelchair, to not assume everybody who uses a wheelchair is going to feel sad about being in a wheelchair.
I think another point that one of our kids made is that they are sometimes in a wheelchair. They can walk, but they don't have the energy to walk far. So they're using the wheelchair some of the time. It's not, again, being stuck in one. It is something that helps them to navigate the world.
That's the key. And we're not a notes it too. It helps you move. This is the thing. It's a wheelchair allows a child to be able to engage with the world. It's not a tool of sadness. It's a mobility tool. It helps them get around. It helps people with wheelchairs get around. And so, if you want a child who's depressed for another reason, totally valid. Kids get depressed. It's a part of storylines. We need to cover that. Kids have feelings. But really consider, are they in a wheelchair because I need something, I need them to have something. Who's depressed? Oh, a kid would be depressed being in a wheelchair. No, they don't have to be. So that's something to consider.
I'm just also thinking, in that context, it could also be like the people around them or the world around them is making them feel bad or limited. It is disability, I guess, focused, but if the kids at school are making them feel bad, if the school isn't accessible, then in that context, again, it's not the wheelchair, it's the environment around them and the people around them that aren't being accessible, and they're stuck with those people and that non-accessible environment.
Totally, Kai. And that changes everything, because that changes it from I feel sad because I'm depressed to, well, exactly that. It's why does the child feel depressed? Well, because everyone else is being ableist. Well, that's a whole different story, because now the story shifts to being about this person being, it's the fact these people are being mean, not that this child's depressed. And that's a whole different story. And thank you, Shay, for actually, it's a wonderful explanation. Most wheelchair users understand their chair as an extension of their body. It just is. And ableism can be the problem, not the disability. And so again, if you feel like it's this is a kid in a wheelchair and they're sad, is it internal or is it external? And if you're covering it for external focus, then fantastic. If you're doing it for internal, really dissect why. And let's be clear, people can be bipolar and have a physical disability, use a wheelchair, but that's a different thing than being depressed because you use a wheelchair. It's another one. A 10-year, and again, this one intentionally has problems in it. Again, a 10-year-old Downs teenager sits happily looking angelic in her party dress. She's innocent and unaware of what's happening around her. The entire episode is about how she's taken advantage of by others because she has Down syndrome. This one requires probably an awareness of Down syndrome to be able to catch it all. Which, since someone mentioned my Tourette note, which was a mistake earlier, this one's intentional. It's not a Downs teenager. It's a teenager with Down syndrome. Although some kids with Down syndrome do call themselves as someone with Downs, but again, it's something you just got to double check. And considering a lot of the ableism and bias that's negative to the Down syndrome community, this is one to be very careful of, because they do have representation issues. Anyone? No one's really sure where this one's at. So the issue with this one is that, thank you. So someone's messaged me as the focus of them being innocent and unaware, and a few people have mentioned. So the issue is the focus on them being innocent and unaware. There is a bias in the industry, not industry, in society, that people with Down syndrome, it's like, oh, it's the happy syndrome. It's because whatever chromosomes you were born without to have Down syndrome impacts some of your world perception. And so many of us who don't have Down syndrome, you know, are impacted by, you know, how people think they're innocent and they're lovely and they're so happy all the time. Well, it removes the complexity of these people, you know, because we just want to see them as these inspiring, innocent creatures. And it's like, no, they're still really interesting people with goals. Sorry, we're running short on time, so it's just kind of quickly noting about where we might go from here. So again, we're doing Down syndrome, and again, the same voice. If we're going to do Down syndrome, how do, you know, you really need to do your research on it and don't just put in a bias. It's a very complex condition that is not given enough attention, and the attention that's given is what we call inspiration porn. It's like, oh my gosh, look what they've overcome. We should all be inspired. And it's like, can we just cut it out and celebrate them for being amazing human beings?
Again, it's that range, because we had a parent who said that her daughter, who has, you know, very extreme Down syndrome, I'm not sure if that's the right way to phrase it, but she gets frustrated when she sees kids with Down syndrome who are being models or fashion designers and doing all these things that her child is not capable of. So, and in fact, she will avoid television that has characters with Down syndrome because of that. So again, it's a show the range.
So we are short on time, but I think out of the different issues we can talk about, considering this group is pretty aware of disability, I think discussing intersectionality, especially since this is involved with the BSO, I think we should chat about intersectionality a bit. Kelly Lynn. And is that one that you have, or is that one that just jumps to me? Sorry.
I thought that was you, but I mean, we can jump in. I mean,
yeah, I'm just moving my notes.
Yeah, one of the things that, as I said at the top, we don't have stats from Statistics Canada that talks in any way about the size of different communities, but we got consistent feedback through the research that they are very frustrated that the few times that they see themselves, they're skinny white dudes. And they're not seeing the whole range of ethnicities and gender. And again, just show more characters and have different characters, different identities.
And queer identities too, and people with disabilities as sexual people with gender expression. A lot of people, we look at people with disabilities as like a very asexual, you know, aromantic, agendered, and it's not true. So we need to explore more of those range. The other thing is on the societal spectrum. Often disabled people are portrayed as homeless, as poor. They're not someone you're going to run across in a grocery store who just came home from their job at the bank. We think of brain injuries as people who are comatose, or they have an angry personality swing, and not someone who gets headaches or may sound more deliberate with their speech, but working in a restaurant. People who might have cerebral palsy or cystic fibrosis and might have physical disabilities, but they're still teachers. You know, these are everyday people that we could have represented. Yes, and then there is, you know, Shay, that's a fantastic kind of note that does not dismiss this is social issue of poverty being common in the disability community, because that is definitely a trend. What I was referring to is more like when we do see it, it's typically like, here's the people under the bridge with the fire, and it but doesn't address, like Shay was saying, how they ended up there. You think in American television, for example, there's often this whole thing about, oh, they're former war vets or something, and it's like, great, but like, why are they there anyways? And so if we're going to bring in poverty and disability, you can't do it without the systemic lens as to why the people with disabilities are struggling in poverty. I do want to do one very small creative exercise just to kind of demonstrate intersectionality, which is, you know, let's design a character. And for whatever reason in the story, you know, we've come out of this workshop and it's like, I really want to do, you know, an autistic character. And again, typically when we see autism on screen, it's like Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory. It's the, you know, nerdy, sciencey, kind of dull, mean-spirited, doesn't embrace the vast possibilities of what an autistic person could be. I'd like to start and just say, like, hey, really interesting fun fact in intersectionality. They're starting to find a very strong correlation, not like 100%, but they're finding that people who are neurodivergent are more likely to also identify as agender or queer. And people who are agender and queer are a higher percentage of them are going to identify as neurodivergent versus an able-bodied, like not more neurotypical. And so what if as an autistic person, you know, they were non-binary? Right? Why not? Why, you know, they're an active being. What if as an autistic person, they were Black? Yeah. Good. Did I hear another voice coming in? Sorry, is that you?
I was going to say, and one of the benefits, social benefits of creating characters like this is that there are communities that are not comfortable with the neurodivergence or disability. So having characters like this can help the kids and can help parents understand and take their children for diagnosis. Because we, you know, in kids media, you have a responsibility, and this can help. I'm sorry, I'm not fully articulate there, but I think my point was made.
All good. I'm typing in things that have come in the chat, which is fantastic. So if someone's noticed that, what if they're Black and Indigenous? Which is yes. Yep. You know, someone else mentioned, what if they also have EDS? Which is Ehlers, and I might have spelt it wrong, my apologies, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a joint issue. By the way, just another plug, if you don't know the toy company Lockwood, which is actually founded by a woman with EDS, really cool, because it's all about making inclusive toys, and needed to find a new career path dealing with her and her son's EDS, and can't speak enough about Lockwood as a great company. Someone else noticed, hey, instead of highlighting the problems, why don't we profile some of the workarounds that they've made for themselves? So instead of, you know, the struggles and problems to socialize, what if instead we talk about the workarounds they have to be able to function? You know, Shay mentions different mobility devices. You know, so if you have EDS, they often wear specialized finger braces or knee braces, elbow braces, etc. Fidgets, there's actually, you know, one of the things, fidget toys, while they've kind of gone mainstream, you know, these things kind of help us keep occupied. Special interest. A lot of people think with autism, there's usually, you know, it's a bit of a stereotype, but also somewhat relevant. You know, autistic people tend to have a bit of a hyperfixation on a particular thing at any given time, but it's always sciencey stuff. You know, like, you know, geeky things, because it's always the very male. Thank you so much, Shay. We're almost done. So the last few minutes of this you can catch in the video. Thank you for your contributions. But like, what kind of things is this person may be interested in? Oh, photography, yeah. Maybe they're into photography. What else might they be interested in as a hobby? And someone's DM me, you know, oh, they're interested in this, you know, change, you know, that change. Yeah, the arts. You know, biking. Someone mentioned back on the non-binary point, talking about what did they sorry, I'm just scrolling up in the chat while things are coming in. Avoidance, non-binary. Yeah, the different expressions, so like pansexual, connections like demisexual. There we go. Dance, animation. You know, maybe she loves wearing colorful clothes, or they, sorry, my apologies, non-binary. Just because running out of room, loves colorful clothes. We often talk about, you know, sensory issues they have, but just as many queer autistic people love frilly ballet skirts just as much as people like the non-itchy. Yeah, pets, animals. So just, you know, they always have their sunglasses. ASMR TikTok. Yeah, because some autistic people are like, I am not. Kelly Lynn knows this, and those of you that know me personally, because there's about 5 of you that know me in the meeting, you know, I'm not the most like, I'll be outgoing when I need to, but I kind of like my quiet time. But there are some autistics that thrive, and this is why so many autistic people are coming out who are performers, because it's that they just thrive in that environment. So, but yeah, suddenly we have a really interesting autistic person, right? Like, can you imagine this is like a really cool 9, 10, 11-year-old, and how much fun you have like casting a kid for this, and then how fun costuming is gonna have, and how fun sets and set design is gonna have. Like, this is suddenly really interesting rather than the stereotypical, you know, little scientist who's just on the computer playing video games in the basement all the time. Right, which is part of the experiment. Since we have gone over time, just one activity I'd like to leave with you to think about that we didn't get to, but thinking about disability everywhere. We've talked about kids, but let's not forget parents. There are children whose parents are deaf. There are children whose parents are amputees. There are children whose parents have a brain injury, right? Like children whose parents are visually impaired. Like the kid also like has other people in their world, the teachers, the people in the cafes. I went to the Apple store a year ago and was served by someone who was either hearing impaired or deaf. I don't know. Our whole communication was in text on a phone. And that was the best interaction I've ever had in the Apple store, because I didn't have to struggle to hear people. You know, so there's ways that we can just subtly bring in disability. And so I leave with you as a creative activity, thinking about an open space community center, right? And if you have, it's like you have a cafe there, you have people playing badminton, you have a little book corner, you have people walking by to and from sessions and classes. Think about all these people, thinking about, you know, thinking of that big community center for those of you in Toronto at Bloor and Spadina, the Nadal Center.
The JCC.
Yeah, the JCC, like sit in there for a bit of time, because they have a huge range of people that go by. You know, like how can we fill the content that we make with at least 25% of the background performers having disabilities, even if they're just like rolling by, they're on the bus having a conversation, waiting for the bus to bring in someone with a wheelchair, and it's just something normal. You know, there's ways that we can do this in the short term while we work on developing the bigger characters. And I'll end that there. How's that, Kelly Lynn?
That's good. But I'm just so tempted. I have to add one little thing is if people do what you're suggesting and include people with disabilities as background performers, that helps to build the talent pool. This is how we get the people who are qualified and skilled enough to lead the stories.
Yeah.
So actually, we could talk about this for much longer, but no, we have the 1 hour. Thank you, everybody, for participating. This has been a very engaging conversation. For those of you who've been here for some of the others, I think we've had some really good and helpful conversations. The recordings will be posted both at the Rocket Fund and the Black Screen Office's websites. So you can get caught up on any that you miss or share them with your networks. So thank you all. And thank you, of course, to Sasha for helping us with this session. And have a good rest of your Friday.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your contributions.